Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Chat. I'm your host, Phill Holdsworth, and my wonderful guest today is Rachel Surtees. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Phill. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It's wonderful to have you here again. And I know because we've done some co-hosting in the past, and so we've had long conversations and had interesting guests that you and I have sort of interviewed.
Yeah,
So just to have a chat with you, just you and I, is wonderful. So thank you very much for agreeing to do that.
feels very cozy and intimate. I'm looking
It
forward to it.
it does, doesn't it?
Mm.
Yeah. So, for our listeners' sake, I know Rachel's often known as a rambling psychotherapist, but actually, I want to pick up on something. Rachel has done a lot of work around leadership. Do you want to tell us something about that work, Rachel?
Yeah, so I actually found myself kind of coming to it organically. It's not something that I intended to do when I became a therapist. But what I found was that there were a lot of people seeking out my services as a therapist who were in leadership positions, and they were getting to like the end of therapy really, and then not leaving. And I was like, what on earth is going on here? So obviously, due diligence and being ethical and all that, I started to ask some questions. And ultimately the answer is you really support us to work out what we're doing at work in our relationships there, You help
Yeah,
us to make our lives easier at work, because something like 95% of leadership work is actually about managing relationships rather
yeah,
than the technical aspect of the job.
yeah,
And it's usually the relationships that people struggle with. That's the bit that they find difficult.
yeah.
So I've moved into leadership development as a side branch of what I do, I guess. So supporting leaders to up their relational game so that they can find ease in that role.
That's fantastic. And I say that because, leadership can make or break a business, can't it? In terms of
Absolutely.
whether it enhances the relationship of a team, of
Mm.
individuals, and sets the culture for an
Mm.
organization. So leadership has a lot of sway. In any kind of business. What kind of things have you been seeing then in your conversations that you can see where the challenges are that leaders are facing?
I think one of the biggest things that tends to come up is that, I guess, projection. So the idea of projection, that when you are in a leadership position, you are not just you. You become this kind of receiver of people's beliefs about what a leader should be.
Mm,
So you're the receptacle of people's projections about like authority figures, parents, leaders, etc., etc., and it changes the dynamic of your relationships. So
mm,
that is one of the biggest things that I tend to help people with, actually, is to understand that they're not necessarily just rocking up at work and being them as
yeah,
an individual. That also turning up as a representative for an awful lot more as well.
yeah,
And helping them to actually inhabit that space, get comfortable in it, and
yeah.
own it for themselves as well.
Yeah, I like what you say in a description that you talk about leaders not necessarily being the total experts in their
No.
area that they're managing. They don't have to be that, and yet my experience of observing leaders sometimes has been um, not knowing something is like a sign of weakness, and so therefore they don't want to let on they don't know something, or they're not as skilled in something because how will it sit with them in terms of how they're received and how they're perceived?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you've seen?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm just talking myself, don't mind me. No, it's definitely something that I've seen, and it's one of the questions that I often end up, or one of the themes that I end up working with people, is how do I be the perfect leader? And what
Mm,
we tend to do is we start with this image of a perfect leader that the individual is carrying around with them,
yeah.
and we pick it apart. We
Yeah.
start to kind of look at like the beliefs that kind of underpin that image that they have, and then like look at what reality could or should be for them.
Mm,
And also look at like the standards that they hold of other people as opposed to themselves. And we come to a slightly more organic, more comfortable place of what a perfect leader should or
yeah.
could be for them that is achievable.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, when they identify that and start to sort of work in that area, that sphere,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's when things like stress and anxiety would come down, wouldn't it? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
which bit?
And
Yeah,
again, when we're talking about stress and anxiety, a lot of what I actually do is, I mean, the crossovers with therapy are quite significant. I mean, I do distinguish if somebody comes to me for leadership development, they are not coming for therapy. So that there is a line that we draw between what is
yeah,
therapeutic support and what is actually kind of more coaching-esque
yeah,
leadership development support. But a lot of what I do is actually teaching people to manage that stress and anxiety, to self-regulate, to be able to kind of hold space in that really kind of regulated, calm, grounded place for other people as well. So
yeah.
skilling people up so that they can hold that space for themselves and others.
Yeah, I just had this thought as you said about the difference between like coaching and therapy,
Mm.
and the thought was why why does there have to be a distinct difference? And the reason why I'll explain why I was thinking that, and it's one of the subjects we wanted to talk about, which was
Mm.
about people, leading their businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs, self-employed, carry an awful lot, don't they? And if they've got staff, they've got to lead the staff. So that's where the leadership sort of understanding and skills and practices come in,
Mhm.
and that can make or break
Mhm.
how successful they are or whether they're successful or not, full stop.
Mhm.
But equally at the same time, um, they're carrying an awful lot of weight and responsibility in so many areas that it's until you probably never really fully understand and appreciate it until you actually run a business yourself and
Mhm.
become self-employed or something like that. All of a sudden, all those things that somebody else did for you, they're now your responsibility.
Absolutely. I've just had a chat at the breakfast table this morning about the difference between like the book stopping with me or
Yeah.
the book being passed around or held by numerous people within an organization.
Mm.
Like as a self-employed individual, as a founder of my own business, the book stops with me. So if I don't do something, it's on
Yeah.
my head.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you're sort of working through things,
Mm.
you can have, like we've talked about, we've had weeks where perhaps it's been quiet, and then we've had weeks where it's been absolutely full on.
Yes.
Not only that, then you're also dealing with your own sort of circumstances
Mm.
and how you feel in those.
Mhm.
So that brings me back to that question of why the difference between coaching and therapy? Because in a way, when you're coaching somebody, it can be, I would say for me, it can be quite therapeutic. When you and I have gone for a walk
Yeah.
and we've chatted,
Mhm.
I found that very therapeutic, even
Oh.
though there are elements of it like coaching
Mhm.
and, good questioning by
Mhm.
yourself. But equally at the same time, the fact that we're out walking in the
Yeah.
countryside
Yeah.
and I'm able to talk about things without
Mhm.
any kind of judgment
Mhm.
has felt quite therapeutic.
Absolutely. And like I say, the crossovers are huge between
Yeah,
coaching and therapy, if I'm wholeheartedly honest with you, Phill.
yeah,
For me, it's actually about the differentiation is about what a person actually wants to sign up for. So what the individual who is seeking out my
right.
services wants to sign up for. Because with therapy, we will dive into areas that people don't necessarily want to go to.
Yeah,
There's additional support that I offer around that. Um,
Mm.
there's a different understanding of where we might travel to, actually.
Right.
It's less focused, it's less solution orientated. Whereas with the coaching, it's much more kind of solution orientated. It's much more forward moving. There's
Mm.
action required in it.
Yeah.
And we have a contract about where we will go to and where we won't.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Yeah.
isn't to say that actually with therapy, I will make people go to areas that they don't want to go to, because like ultimately I'm not going to do that. But
Yeah.
the way we work is different.
Right. And I suppose, I mean, you need both sides really.
Mm,
In I suppose when you're leading a business, whether it's
mhm,
just you, whether it's you and some employees,
mhm.
or even you and some business partners, there's still all the stresses and strains that come with it. You get the highs of the successes, and then you get the lows of seemingly knockbacks or disappointments because you thought something was going to happen, then it doesn't.
Absolutely.
And so there's all sorts of things going on there. And then
Yeah,
you've,
and I would tackle those things in both arenas,
yeah,
but I would probably just do them in slightly different ways.
yeah, yeah. So I'm just thinking, stress levels
Mm.
in people, knowing full well, like you said, you're using your term, the buck stops with you.
Hmm.
So you know if something doesn't get done, nobody's around to do it. So
Hmm.
you've got to do it. Or you're the type of person who feels nobody can do it as good as you. So
Yeah,
you're reluctant to delegate it, because that's the other side of the coin, isn't it?
it is. Yeah.
In leading something, is can you trust people to do something and not feel like you've got to be there controlling it?
Hmm.
And that in itself comes with its own stresses. Um, and the impact on an individual can be far reaching, can't it?
It absolutely can. It absolutely can. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking in terms of the challenges that business leaders face, whether you're, small, medium, large company,
Hmm.
the challenges may be slightly different. They might be varying in degrees,
Hmm.
but they're still challenges nonetheless.
Mm.
How do we help people in those circumstances find that equilibrium and
Okay.
that place where they can reduce their stress and anxiety?
Yeah. So for me, I guess when I'm working with people, the one thing that is pretty consistent
Mhm.
is that there's a set of beliefs that people hold unique to each individual.
Yeah.
So the beliefs will be different depending on who I'm working with, but there's
Mm,
usually a set of beliefs that underpin the way that we operate in the world that are somewhat limiting us.
mm, mm,
Um, and they often limit our capacity to create time and space for ourselves. They often limit our ability to look after ourselves. They limit our ability to ask for support. They limit our ability
mm.
to welcome in a flow of plenty. There's all sorts of
Yeah.
ways that they limit us. So for me, the one thing that's consistent when I'm working with people, whether I do that in therapy or whether I do that in leadership development, is that
Mm,
we kind of isolate what these limited we identify, sorry, not isolate, we identify what these limiting beliefs are, and we
yeah.
start to work to change them.
Right.
So one of the things that is absolutely at the foundation of everything that I do with people, most people that I work with have somewhat of a limited capacity to actually create space to support themselves.
Mm.
Most people feel like they need to be working most
Yes.
of the time, and
Yep.
they find it very, very hard to kind of section off those spaces for themselves that are sacred.
Yeah.
So one
I
of the things
just
I advocate for with people is that.
Right. I was just thinking, some examples of that would be, for example, where we will say, right, I'm going to have a cut-off time So 5 o'clock is my cutoff time.
Yeah.
But some people can't do that, and they'll work into the night,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll work to the early hours of the morning
Mm-hmm.
because they feel the weight of responsibility to get these things done. They'll
Yes.
work over the weekend.
Yeah.
So taking your point about like for example, their belief about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
it could be, well, my well-being takes a lower status.
Mm.
So, and I just wonder there, how do they see themselves? One, but also in terms of if they've got other people working for them,
Mm.
but they feel they still need to do all this. Because I suppose in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, we've been brought up in a society where if I was sat reading, even though I'm learning
Mm.
and I'm doing something specific in my work, I'm
Mm-hmm.
reading something because I need to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm sat there reading, it doesn't look like I'm working.
Mm.
We used to
Mm.
have this joke about how do you give the impression that you're busy working. So if you're walking around the office, for example, make sure you've got a pile of papers in your hand, because you look like you're on a mission. You're going somewhere. You're probably just going for a walk.
Absolutely. It's
But
it's
because
weight
it's
resistance is the pile of paper. You're actually just building muscle strength. Yeah.
yeah, and somebody else said they found it really useful to have piles of paper on the desk, and
Mm.
then when somebody came and asked for something, they'll go, "Oh yes, I know it's somewhere here,"
Mm-hmm.
and they're flicking through the paperwork, and all these little techniques to give people the impression you're actually doing something.
Yeah.
And I know I can remember myself sometimes feeling, even though I'm reading something,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't look like I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
I felt guilty myself. So I wonder what other people must feel like
Yeah.
if they've got those similar mindsets. I must be working all the time. I must be seen to be working.
Yeah. And
There's lots.
it's interesting, isn't it? So it's one of the things that I would start with at that point in time, with if somebody comes to me with this kind of problem, is to say,
Yeah,
just to point out to somebody how much of your energy is tied up in working out what other people are thinking about you,
yeah,
and what other people might be,
yeah,
how other people might be judging you. And imagine if you could free that energy up to
yeah.
just spend time looking after yourself,
Mm,
doing the actual work that you want and need to be doing. If you could just free that time and energy up to
yeah,
do those things rather than actually concentrating on what's going on out there and what other people might be thinking and feeling about you and how other people might be judging you or what other people might need from you, guessing what other
yes.
people might need from you. If we
Yeah.
could free that energy up, how might that feel for you? And
It's
most people take a
yeah.
really deep breath and go, "Oh, that would feel amazing." You know, oh, is that
Yeah.
possible?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the thing is, I think there's an element of ego
Mm,
in not being able to let go. And, so for example, being constantly thinking about what other people might be thinking about you.
mm,
I think oftentimes it's pretty obvious people are not thinking about you.
yeah.
They're absolutely not thinking about you at all because they're focused on their things.
Mm-hmm,
But yet we have this mindset, oh yeah, well, if I don't appear to be, or if I don't get that finished by that date or
mm-hmm.
that time or whatever, it's what will people think?
Yes.
And I just wonder whether there's a bit of an ego there.
Um, uh, yes and no. If we
Mm,
think of ego as like our construct for dealing with everyday life,
mm,
then yes, it is absolutely ego. If we think of ego as this kind of like raging, narcissistic, overblown thing that's quite, full of its own self-importance, then no, I don't agree with you on that point.
right.
But if we think of it as our construct for dealing with everyday life,
Mm,
um, part of us has somewhere in our lives, usually very early in childhood, learned that it's really important to be concerned with what other people think of us in order to survive.
Yeah.
So
What one
that
of
that part of us is
yeah.
tied up in that because
Yeah.
it supports our survival.
Yes.
Um, the thing is that actually that part of us is also it's capable of being trained into a different way of thinking and feeling as
Mm,
well.
mm.
It's just that people don't necessarily know the steps to take to do that.
Yeah. There's 2 points there, because one is the statement, to be successful you need to work hard. To earn lots of money you need to work hard.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to work hard is the common denominator in our thinking,
Yes.
as though working hard
Mm-hmm.
is going to solve all our problems. So that's one.
You're right. That's one of those limiting beliefs that some people carry.
Yeah,
Not all people, but some people carry that.
yeah,
In order to be deserving of money, in order to be deserving of people's gratitude, in order to be
yeah.
deserving of people's high regard of me, I have to work hard.
Yeah, and be seen to be working hard as
Yeah.
well. So the whole thing of sending emails, ridiculous o'clock at night or
Mm-hmm.
early hours of the morning,
Mm.
I've done it myself, so I've got to hold my hands up to that. But things like that, and then how people feel in terms of, oh, my boss has sent me an email, I need
Mm.
to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're almost like being controlled by the circumstances, not being in control,
Mm.
and actually then managing our time and giving ourselves that time to have more positive thinking.
Yeah. And in those circumstances, when a person that I'm working with is dealing with that, Phill, they're
Mm,
in that projective space. You know,
mm,
when you receive an email from your boss or a client at stupid
yeah,
o'clock at night, and you go, "Oh God, I need to respond to that," and I feel the need to do it now because that person. That I had one a few weeks back. I've got a big contract with a large governmental organisation that's coming up,
yeah.
starting in a couple of weeks' time. And the person, my contact or one of my contacts there, sent me an email at 11:30 at night. Stupidly, I read it.
Yeah,
Stupidly,
yeah,
I read it. And then immediately I was filled with that, oh God, I must get on with that straight away. There was no compulsion. I was like, at 11:30 at night, I have no brain capacity to actually deal with that. So I'm not dealing with it now. You know, there is in me at least
yeah,
that level of I have no capacity to actually think about that right now. So I'm not dealing with it right now. But it's then in my psyche and I have to kind of carry it to remember it for the next morning. And it takes up a little bite of my energy to carry it for that long.
yeah,
It's in my unconscious overnight. You know, it's going to affect my sleep. It's gonna have that impact. I have to hold it,
yeah.
you know?
That
Um,
that's a really interesting point,
mm,
Rachel, because we, there's some experiences we've had, both myself and my wife,
mm,
who we have been dealing with some tricky issues, and we've been sent an email on a weekend,
mhm,
on a night time,
mhm,
and we made a pact between us that we would not read those emails
mm,
or really go into our emails on an evening. We give
mm,
ourselves a break.
mm,
And likewise on a weekend, if it comes to a weekend, it can wait till Monday morning.
mm,
And at first, that was really hard to do because everything you describe
mm,
really started to kick in. Oh, I need to respond to this, and so on.
mm,
But we found that if we didn't follow that agreement,
mm,
we'd have sleepless nights.
mhm,
We'd feel quite stressed and
mhm,
anxious
mm,
until we dealt with that situation. And if some of those situations are, say, long running,
mm,
you just feel like you're in a constant state of stress, which is
mm.
obviously not good for
No,
anybody.
exactly.
So
So,
yeah.
so I mean, let's take the email thing as a prime example, Phill. Like,
Mm,
um, I've got emails coming to my phone. Do I need them there?
Yeah.
Do they need to come to my phone? Or actually, can they head to my Outlook on my laptop only? So the only time that I get emails is if I actively log into my laptop and open my Outlook.
Yeah.
You know,
Y-
so I'm actually primed to deal with emails in those moments. Do I
Yeah.
need them coming to my phone? Or actually, would I be doing myself a favour by just taking that email app off my phone?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can do. There's an easy way of doing it in terms
Yeah,
of just switching certain email accounts off.
yeah.
So, for example, if you've got a personal account which has got
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with work or anything like that, you
Mm-hmm.
can leave that on, but
Mm-hmm.
have all the others turned off on your phone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
I
So, and yet, when I suggest that to people, when I go, "Do you need it coming to your phone?" They get really anxious and kind of go, "Oh, what?" So we,
yeah,
we're working. We're really highlighting that belief that's at the bottom of it there, and
yeah,
that's the stuff that we kind of dig into. Like, actually, your survival is not banking on this anymore. So
yeah,
let's look at strategies to regulate yourself. Let's look at strategies to support yourself. Let's look at strategies to get out of that projective space. Let's start asking people what they expect of us rather
yeah,
than trying to work it out for ourselves, because that ties us up in knots and uses up so much of our energy. There's all sorts of ways that we can actually like counteract that anxious
yeah.
survival energy in ourselves and really look after ourselves,
Yeah, and that's the important part, because if we
Mm.
don't look after ourselves, then at the end of the day, that will have a knock-on effect on our business,
Yeah,
and actually just create a more stressful situation.
yeah,
So we're just adding to it as opposed to reducing it, aren't
yeah,
we?
yeah.
So in
So
terms of
some of my clients find it quite amusing, Phil, because I'm very clearly from Yorkshire. One of the things that I say to people is, if you don't look after yourself, you're no good to no one.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
you're
it's
no good to
true.
no one.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about setting healthy boundaries that
Yeah,
actually reduce stress and anxiety and
yeah,
actually put you in a good place to operate at
yeah.
your peak.
Yes,
So, yeah,
absolutely. And to be available and to do your best for other people as well,
yeah,
which is like really supportive of relationships. It's really, so actually it has a really positive effect in your relationships
yeah,
ongoing. But people have this anxiety that it won't, that people will be cross with them or that people will be upset by them not being available 24/7, etc., etc.
yeah. I'm just conscious of time, Rachel. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you very much for the conversation. Albeit brief, we've skimmed across the surface and covered a number of,
We've
I
covered a
think,
lot again in a short period of time,
yeah,
haven't we?
no, yeah, but very poignant things as
Yeah.
well. Um, Now, if this has piqued the interest of any of our listeners,
Mm.
um, and they'd like to talk further about it, how could they
Mhm.
get hold of you?
So the best place to find details of what I do, etc., is on my website, ramblingpsychotherapist.co.uk. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram under the same moniker, The Rambling Psychotherapist. And I'm also on LinkedIn as Rachel Surtees as well. So, hit the socials, give me a follow. I talk about this stuff all the time, lots of hints and tips, plenty of my Yorkshire humour.
Yes,
So
yes,
it
yeah,
would be great to see people in those places.
and that's brilliant. You're definitely right about your Yorkshire humour.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just if it's of interest to any of our listeners, just to say that Rachel is one of these wild water swimmers, and she likes those ice cold plunges in the morning, which really gets your brain cells operating and gives you that sort of wide awake alertness.
Absolutely does, Phil. So for me, a daily exposure to outdoor cold water is one of my sacred things that
Right.
focuses my brain like there's no other. It regulates me. It makes me feel calm. It makes me feel in a place where I'm actually able to tackle the world every day. It makes me feel grounded. It makes me feel really solid. So that is one of the spaces that I reserve for myself that is absolutely sacred. Nobody and nothing comes in between me and that.
Right. Rachel, thank you so much for this conversation. Really
Oh, no, it's
enjoyed
been a
it.
pleasure as always. Thank you.
And have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye.